Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We're going to let people roll in for just a minute. Okay, thank you for joining us, everybody. Our webinar will begin in just a few moments. Just to talk about some upcoming webinars and events that we have at COEH. On Wednesday, December 4th, Dr. Gina Solomon at UC San Francisco will present on climate change and environmental degradation impacts on worker well-being in collaboration with the California Labor Lab. On Tuesday, December 10th, in collaboration with the Midwest Center for Occupational Health and Safety, ERC, PhD candidate Majid Bagheri Hossein-Abadi will be presenting his research on the performance of the general population for N95 respirator fit tests, with this research conducted at the Minnesota State Fair in 2021 and 2022. And for today's webinar, again, you can always find out more at coehberkeley.edu/webinars. For today's webinar, on behalf of education and research centers throughout the country, we are pleased to present the Ergonomics webinar series. This collaborative effort on behalf of each ERC's continuing education program aspires to provide access to current research supported through NIOSH ERC programs. Thank you for joining us. Today's webinar, Ergonomics and Your Parents, Musculoskeletal Challenges of Home Healthcare for a Loved One, is presented by Kelsey McCoskey and John Pentikis, in collaboration with the Johns Hopkins Education and Research Center for Occupational and Environmental Health. Just a few housekeeping items first. You will be muted during this presentation. If you would like to ask a question, please enter it in the online Q&A box that's going to be at the bottom of your Zoom screen in the toolbar. We will save time at the end of the presentation to address as many questions as possible. And we'll also have the chat open. Feel free to use it, participate, join the conversation. This presentation is being recorded and will be made available on the Center for Occupational and Environmental Health YouTube page within 5 business days. All participants who logged in with their registration email for the full live presentation today will receive an email tomorrow with a link to an evaluation form that will qualify participants for a certificate of completion worth 1 continuing education contact hour. Once the evaluation is completed, you'll be able to access and print your certificate. Now, we are pleased to welcome our presenters, Kelsey McCoskey and John Pentikis. Kelsey McCoskey has been an ergonomist with the Defense Centers for Public Health Aberdeen for the last 23 years. In addition to performing applied research projects, site assessments, and handling regulatory issues, she is responsible for conducting training courses and the development and assessment of ergonomic programs. Her primary areas of interest include healthcare ergonomics and safe patient handling and mobility, which we'll hear about today. Dr. John Pentikis has been the Ergonomics and Engineering Branch Manager at the Defense Centers for Public Health Aberdeen for the past 7 years. Before that, he served as an ergonomist with the U.S. Army since 1991. His work at Defense Centers for Public Health Aberdeen and its predecessor organizations has focused on serving the needs of the U.S. government. Both Kelsey and John serve as faculty at the Uniformed Service University of Health Sciences and are certified professional ergonomists. John and Kelsey, I'll pass it over to you and I'll stop sharing my screen as well.
All right, great. Thank you very much. And to everyone out there, thanks for coming by. And I'm going to share my screen and hopefully technology is on our side. And that looks like I know what I'm doing.
All right. It looks great, John.
Excellent. Well, hey, everyone, thank you so much for coming out today. We appreciate you spending some of your time with me and Kelsey. First off, I would like to apologize for the clunky slide, but once legal gets involved, This might be the biggest presentation title I've ever seen. But as we said earlier, really the focus of this presentation is the stresses that are acting on the body when someone is taking care of a loved one. And like all good government presentations, we have to have our disclaimer, and this is no different. So although this is an official opinion, me and Kelsey have given you the good stuff. We believe in what we're saying. So don't take this as a throwaway presentation, but one rather that nobody wants to touch it within our chain of command, but we're happy to accept it as ours and talk to you offline about anything, or within the chat if you have anything that you would like to discuss. So really, 3 things that we want you to get out of this talk is try to figure out who the average parent and caregiver are. Because now we're starting to not so much quantify capabilities, but quantify what's going on with relation to age, outside influences that may prevent you from giving as much care as you need, or why you can only give as much care as you're giving. We are going to look a little bit at the musculoskeletal risk, and during the introduction, the word research was used. I would say this is officially not research, but still good stuff. More of a thought experiment. If we have anybody out there, they went to Auburn, my advisor, Dr. Sessick, was always big on, we have this lab, we have all this equipment, use it for something else other than your dissertation work. And me and my fellow grad student did this. So this sort of gets a little bit from the quantifying the musculoskeletal risk, non-official research, no IRB, no older person was hurt in the conducting of trials. And I may have heard wrong a little bit, but he hasn't come back to me with a lawsuit, so hopefully that's all right. And then, also we want to start thinking about what's out there that solution-wise that can impact for the better caregivers and care recipients. And the picture on the right, those are my parents, Ellie and Jim, on their wedding day. And you wouldn't think, about 60 plus years later, all that you would need, all the support that they would need in order to live their day-to-day life. So really, the factors that are driving home caregiving, there's a lot of bullets here, so you can take a look at them, but really we'll start off with how old we are getting as a country. Already there are 35 million Americans who are 65 plus. That's a tick above 10% of the entire population. So 1 out of 10 people, although maybe just because you're 65 doesn't mean you need care, but the numbers are to the point where it's trending that we are getting old and that a lot of care is going to have to be exerted or extended for this population. You can see baby boomers are getting older, and the cost to put somebody in any type of facility where there's outpatient care is very expensive. So what factors do we see, or do we think that happening? Again, an old population, the cost of being in a long-term facility, where it says lack of savings. I found this very interesting because I went to a retirement seminar about 15 years ago, and the person presenting the seminar said, if you do not have long-term care insurance, then you've saved nothing. And I'm like, yeesh. Within a week, I had a insurance policy, but I don't think a lot of people think they're thinking of maybe their Roth IRA, their thrift savings plan, or any other tax-deferred investments, but are they thinking about how they're going to pay for their care if something happens to them? And then the other thing that's driving a lot of home care is there are not a whole lot of qualified home care providers. So between people getting older, things being expensive, and not a whole lot of people out there that can help you, there is a large demand for home health care. And just a few interesting tidbits I got from the literature, and it makes sense. The more demanding the person is who needs the care, the more demanding it is on the person providing the care. So between mental health and physical health, those factors are increasing as well. So basically what we're seeing is that families pretty much are the primary source of support for people who need care. And the question that we had, we were thinking about is, people are providing this care, but what kind of support is available for them as far as engineering controls or other guidance? And just to sort of give you an idea of who the average home caregiver is. Now, this is just average based on a roll-up of about 1,400 people. But first off, we have females more likely to take care of a loved one than males. So if we're looking at this from a musculoskeletal perspective, females have about 70% of the strength of males. So already the poor caregiver is at a little bit of a disadvantage. Almost 50 years old, not quite. So we're not talking young. Over half are married, and when you add in a committed relationship, that bumps it up to over 60%. So now there's also time stressors taking place between taking care of your at-home family and now taking care of a loved one who's in need of care. Add to that employment status, where a lot of people are working. Again, we have more of a time demand, stress demand. And once you get into the game, on average, you could be spending 4 years spending over 20 hours a week helping with activities of daily living. We're talking about maybe hygiene and shopping, bills, companionship. So some of those activities will require some sort of musculoskeletal effort to take care of the person. And what I thought was very interesting is the bottom bullet. I really thought caregivers were trending over, but we see that millennials are getting in the game too. And when you think about their age, born between 81 and 96, it's interesting. I thought caregivers would be just a touch older, but there we are. So just wrapping this all up, there's a lot of other stresses taking place when you provide care to a loved one. We're talking your family, the younger segments of the family, and your job. And then when you start really looking at what's going on with all the time that you're spending on providing care to a loved one, now if we start looking at a musculoskeletal perspective, these are things that you should be doing better at, not worse at, because now someone is depending on you. Less medical visits, poor eating habits, worse exercise habits. Unfortunately, last winter, so about a year ago from now, my brother needed long-term care. He was diagnosed with something that he didn't have much time. And from my perspective, looking at this slide, it's very interesting because in a very short period of time, I cannot tell you how much time I spent in a hospital or spent in an environment where care was given, but none of this care was for me. And you have that, all of a sudden I'm living off of what's in the vending machines. So it's really adds up to a scenario where, for the most part, I was just providing healthcare and emotional support. But even layers like that, although I'm not lifting him up per se or transporting him, it still takes a toll on the caregiver. And then just to get a feel for other factors that impact caregiving, a lot of these bullets, when you look at it, is that people are not using services. In fact, many times services are available and people choose not to take part in them or didn't even know they exist. So I thought it was interesting in the third and fourth bullets. You look at 2016, Wolf is going through and said only 25% use supportive services. Then all of a sudden, 4 years later, Feldman is coming up with about the same number. So I think it's important that if you are put in this position where you are going to be a primary caregiver, see what's out there support-wise, either emotionally or physically. Are there lifts or hoists or something that will help you move someone around? I would encourage people, we're also talking about recommendations a little early, but really what the literature is telling us is that there are services out there, but yet people are not aware of or choosing not to use those services. And we're just gonna switch gears for a little bit, and Kelsey's gonna take over for a bit, and then I'll be back again.
All right, good afternoon. So what type of risks do we see in informal caregivers? Well, in the survey by the National Alliance for Caregiving and AARP in 2020, 29% of caregivers reported that they have been providing care for 1 to 4 years, and 28% reported providing care for more than 5 years. This is up from 24% reported in the previous survey in 2015. Additionally, what we see here is over 60% of caregivers reported assisting with one or more activities of daily living, or ADLs. So high physical strain is especially prevalent among caregivers in moderate to high intensity care situations, 24% versus 8% of those in low intensity care situations. This suggests that the higher hours of care provided and the higher number of ADLs used to calculate the index are related to higher physical strain. In fact, those who provide care for more than 21 hours per week are more likely to say caregiving was a physical strain at 28% versus 12% when providing care for 20 or fewer hours per week. In a 2024 study, results showed that 70% of informal and 87% of formal carers reported having more than one musculoskeletal injury, while 63% of informal carers and 61% of formal carers reported having a musculoskeletal injury in the last year. The lower back had the highest injury prevalence at greater than 10% for most groups, for both groups. It is notable that in a study by Braga, home caregivers were even more at risk than caregivers in a hospital, because we know that safe patient handling is a primary source of injury in clinical settings as well. So the fact that in a home environment they were even more at risk, that is a notable finding. Common injuries for caregivers are low back and shoulder sprains and strains. So when highway-related injuries are excluded from industry injury totals, the home healthcare rate still exceeds the corresponding injury rate in hospitals by nearly 25%, and the national rate by almost 50%. Many of the patient handling injuries are classified as overexertion, which is most often cited nationwide for work-related injuries resulting in lost work time. The rate for overexertion injuries in home health care services is especially high. In fact, it's more than double the corresponding national rate and one of the 10 highest rates reported for overexertion injuries among the several hundred industries on which the Bureau of Labor Statistics publishes data. So this suggests to us that there are relatively high injury risks associated with working in and around people's homes as caregivers. And one of those risks involves the maneuvering of patients single or carries in this case, single-handedly, often without the use of the mechanical lifting devices that are sometimes available in more medical institutional settings. Sometimes when a loved one has an obvious medical event happen, there's a clear evidence that they're going to need support. However, often these changes are happening slowly over time as people age and may not be as obvious. So it's important to recognize some signs that there are physical or cognitive baselines that are changing. These can also impact each other. So if the memory or cognition is declining, they may not move around as much, so their physical capabilities may decline as well. Here we have some typical caregiver activities. Caregivers are also frequently spouses. For example, my mother-in-law spent many years being a primary caregiver for my father-in-law after he became wheelchair dependent following a stroke. Fortunately, they were still able to travel and engage in many of their social and community activities. They had the ability to get a power wheelchair and modify a minivan to accommodate it. However, I know that the daily activities of transferring, bathing, eating, taking care of the housework, and even companionship as his speech was impacted by the stroke, all of those things were a lot physically, mentally, and emotionally over many years of care that she provided. Alternately, for many years, my mom was a caregiver for my grandmother. In her case, her role was primarily administering, kind of managing finances and companionship because my grandmother was in a long-term care facility specializing in dementia. However, depending on the role that is being taken on by a caregiver, they're going to involve tasks that can lead to musculoskeletal injury. And so it should be noted that as part of this conversation here today, we're considering kind of the average parent or the average loved one. Those caregivers with loved ones with spinal cord injuries or brain injuries, advanced dementia, and so on, are going to have significant additional activities in higher acuity and higher dependency carees, and thus greater levels of musculoskeletal risk. Some of the typical caregiver activities have a higher risk of developing a musculoskeletal disorder than others. So once you are assisting with movement, whether it be getting in and out of the car or getting up from a chair, you increase the risk of developing a musculoskeletal disorder. Additionally, as your loved one becomes more dependent, whether cognitively or physically, the risk of assisting with these tasks may also increase. If a caree is less physically able to assist with being able to stand up or change position, or if they are more physically independent but are unable to cognitively follow direction or be aware of their environment, then there may be an increased risk to the caregiver in those cases as well. In home environments, there are typically minimal engineering controls to assist with moving and transferring the caree. We'll look at some examples of engineering controls later in the presentation. However, especially in home environments, generally the options are primarily low-cost controls such as slip sheets and slide boards, which while they do ease some of the manual handling, they do not eliminate the hazard. Many in-home environments practice the hug transfer, where you're ultimately holding the caree kind of under their arms in a hug position. And as you can see in this study by Maris, that has been found to have a high risk of injury occurring. We looked at what the average caregiver and average care recipient looked like in terms of height and weight. From the National Center for Health Statistics in 2021 anthropometric reference, an average or 50th percentile 49-year-old female is 5'4" tall and weighs 160 pounds. We assume that the mother and father were each 80 years old, and so we averaged the 70 to 79-year-old category and the 80 years and older category. and assumed that the caregiver would be manually moving 60% of the carrie's weight, which in the case of these average people were 92 and 108 pounds. From the interpreting results section in the Liberty Mutual material handling tables, designing tasks to be able to be done by greater than 75% of the female work population will offer the best protection from manual handling injuries. And it appears that the lifting and lowering tasks of moving our carries to and from a seated position are not safe. Just like any other manual material handling activity, as the weight increases, so does the risk of injury. In all instances that we will discuss today, none of the tasks meet the 75% safety threshold. Again, when looking at the percent of the working population that can perform lifting and lowering tasks similar to what we would see in a care environment, for females, none of the lifted loads meet the 75% safety threshold. You can see in the chart that the female lifts are the blue and purple lines and the male lifts are the red and green lines. And based on this information, males may have a little bit easier time lifting and lowering the seated care recipients. Some of you may be familiar with the NIOSH lift equation, which determined that 51 pounds is the maximum allowable weight to be lifted under ideal conditions. However, those ideal conditions are not typically found in the context of lifting and lowering humans. There are many complicating factors when moving humans that are not found when moving inanimate objects, such as shifting weights, variability in the ability to assist, unpredictable movements, medical limitations and complications, the instability of the weight being lifted, shifting centers of gravity, lack of handles, the inability to hold the lifted weight close to the body. People can be disoriented or unable to follow simple directions. So all of those things factor in, and some later work to look at the NIOSH lift equation in this context found that the maximum allowable weight for a dependent patient under ideal conditions would be reduced to 35 pounds, which in many cases is less than the weight of a single limb. Okay, so from here, we will move into looking at some best, average, and worst case scenarios.
Right. Hey, everyone, John back here again. So let's see. All right. Just again, this was part of the thought experiment that my fellow grad student and his wife partook in. So if you're wondering why these weights were these weights, I was the 210-pound person, Ron, the 130-pound person, and his wife, Cassie, the 100-pound person. So what we did is we had the MG equipment. So we looked at low back muscles. So we went with the erector spinae. And also we did a little calculating using the Utah back model. So just a couple different ways to try to quantify what's going on with the back when we're raising or lowering someone. And so here for the best case, we went with the 130-pound parent. We didn't use Cassie at 100 pounds because I didn't want to break her. But we could see that the back muscles, even when there's a mismatch, in this case, me being a larger person lifting a smaller person, there was still a large increase in muscle activity. Now, that doesn't mean just because your muscle activity is over your maximum voluntary contraction doesn't mean you instantly get injured, but it is pretty disconcerting to know that when performing a lifting task in a fairly controlled environment, that the back muscles are working really hard. And the Utah back model put us in the midpoint. So although our back compressive forces really weren't at the point where the force was a risk, it was still elevated and something you normally wouldn't want to have or to be a part of all the time when performing a lift. Medium case scenario, we can see we're still having increases and muscle activity. So we know that raising a person from a seated position is demanding. And one of the reasons I wanted to quantify these numbers is I was visiting my parents. There was Rosie, the home health care aide, was there. Rosie weighed, if she weighed 100 pounds, I'd be stunned. My brother's talking to Rosie. My brother's like, gee, I really wish Gina was here. And Rosie's like, yeah, me too. Gina's a big gal. She could really, do a great job lifting this person up. And as an ergonomist, I'm standing there, kind of amazed at what I'm hearing, because my brother bought a patient lift and it was at the bed, but they felt, well, it's not worth using because that takes that much longer to perform the lift or lower. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me! But you can take ergonomics into the house, but it can only go so far. It is, it's an old school thing that we would joke about. No ergonomics, no pain, and no ergonomics, no pain. It's a little more humorous when you write it up. I'm sure you've all seen it before. And there I am, like, we already have the engineering control in place, but yet we're at a little bit of a standstill. So worst case lifting scenario, there I am. I played a little bit of video so you can sort of see what's going on. And near the end, I took it easy on Ron because, like I said, the kid was helping me out. I didn't want to have to explain to his wife why I broke him. So here we go. All right, so think about it. There was just a controlled environment, two healthy people, but there was no way Ron was lifting me up if I didn't give him some type of support. And what's interesting, I was talking to one of my friends today, and he's like, "So John, what you got going on later today?" I'm like, "Oh, doing a presentation on caring, the ergonomics of caring for someone." And he's going, "Geez, my father-in-law takes three of us. Before he had dialysis, took three people to raise him, lower him, flip him as need be." So again, the demands that take place on the individual are a lot going to be dictated on the capabilities and size of the person they're providing care for. And here, again, just look at the MG, and you can see the back model has us in the red now. That yeah, most of the workforce is at risk, so we know it's demanding. You could see, especially for the left side of the back muscles, you go from, and if anyone's ever done an MVC, you know how hard you're working to get those muscles firing, and you wouldn't think that you could double that output, but yet in this case, it is. So when we start having a mismatch between caregiver size and care recipient size, there's a lot that can go wrong. And pretty much we did the same thing, but instead of lifting, we were lowering. And there are a couple of options out there. We didn't do it all, but with the gait belt, you can grab from behind and lift somebody using the handles on the back, or you could go from the front. In disclosure, now talking about it, I'm like, oh, it would be nice if we did front and back, but that'll be for the next thought experiment next time I'm down at Auburn. But at least when we're lowering people, it's interesting, the back muscles, the extraspinal muscles aren't working as hard, but yet the compressive forces still can be there. So although we know lifting, we know lowering is easier on the body than lifting, in certain scenarios, that still might not be enough. Here you can just see what we did in medium case scenario with the middle caregiver lowering on the lightest of the folks, and the worst case. Again, I wasn't allowed to move Cassie. So bottom line, lifting much more strenuous than lowering, which we know that, but even the lowering isn't particularly easy. And what I thought was very interesting is when doing a little digging on lowering, and I'm sure this has more to do with industry, but it makes sense even in the healthcare environment. So the first bullet says impact force is dependent on the fragility of the item. Well, if the item's not going to break, you can drop it however you want. So that's great to know. But with a parent, so I guess the more independent the parent is, the less you have to worry about breaking them. You can sort of get them to a point and they can take it from there. And when you start thinking about lowering somebody, we have the little graphic on the bottom left that's talking about individual capability. And as the load is close to the body, you're fully capable. And if that load extends further away, your capability dramatically drops. And that's the same thing if you have a person you're lowering down in a chair. If they're fully dependent on you to get them from a standing position to a seated position, you're going to be looking like one of the stick figures more to the right, and we really don't want that. So it would be helpful if the person who's requires the care could assist as much as they could. In my dad's case, I think this comment pretty much sums it up, where he said, "I don't know why people go jogging. I've never seen a jogger have a smile on their face in my entire life." But maybe instead of hitting the peanut M&Ms and putting around in the garage, if you had gone to the gym and did some type of weightlifting, then perhaps he'd have more strength in his triceps, which would allow him to grab onto a chair handle and lower himself versus being dependent on somebody having to pretty much bend all the way down. So a few recommendations from the literature all make perfect sense. Training. We don't think about doing things at home and needing to train, but training is pretty important. Everyone now is on the same page. You have a few practice sessions with someone who perhaps, if something goes wrong, that there's going to be a adverse event. Help. I love this one. When I was with visiting my uncle, every Tuesday I would visit him at his home and then his long-term care facility. He was 96 years old, and I see him walking from the bathroom, getting back into his lazy chair, his recliner, lazy boy recliner, and each step he's taking, he's going lower and lower into the ground, where he's holding on to the handles of his walker, but his chest is about 3 inches off the ground. And I'm like, Uncle Ted, I can't pick you up. I got him a pillow and had to ask for assistance, and a couple other people came by to lift him up. And he was only about 120 pounds. He was, in essence, a bag of bones. So don't encourage people not to fall into the trap that just because someone is light doesn't mean it's not a big deal to help them up or raise them up by yourself. And then, the last thing I would really comment on is get care. If you are a primary caregiver for someone, it's noble that you're providing that care to that person to the recipient who needs it, but you're only as good as you can only provide services as good as what you can offer based on your current situation. So take care of your mental health, take care of your physical health, and know the resources around you so you can ask for assistance as needed.
Okay, so kind of moving on into what a little bit more of that looks like. So while in this presentation we've tended to focus on physical stressors, it's important to note that there are other stressors placed on and experienced by caregivers. Some education and training can assist care providers with helping to advocate for their loved ones in medical settings. It can improve their knowledge and comfort levels around the medical conditions experienced by their loved one and associated treatments or medicine-related challenges and side effects. And it can also give them some of the psychological and emotional support techniques and tools to help both their caree and themselves. Sorry about that. Lost. Okay, so some recommendations for the parent and caregiver. If you want to stay healthy and mobile well into old age, start walking today, even if you've already edged into what I guess we would consider old age. That's the conclusion of a report from Lifestyle Interventions and Independence for Elders trial published in the Journal of American Medical Association. The trial included more than 1,600 men and women between the ages of 70 and 89. None exercised regularly and all were relatively frail. Half were randomly assigned to an exercise program that included daily walking plus strength and balance exercises. The other half took part in education workshops on healthy aging that included some gentle stretching routines. After 2.5 years, the volunteers in the exercise group were 28% less likely to have become disabled, as defined by the inability to walk about 400 yards without help, compared to those in the education group. They were also 18% less likely to have had any episode of physical disability. We know in general, fitness and nutrition are important for health and wellness, physically, emotionally, and mentally. While overall strength and mobility does tend to decrease as we age, and certainly is impacted by disability and illness, the more we move our bodies to maintain strength and flexibility, the better off we'll be in the long run. Okay, so here we have a variety of low and medium cost engineering controls to assist with movement and mobility. The appropriateness of each of these controls kind of depends on the variety of factors, such as the movement surfaces the person is coming from and going toward, space constraints, flooring and other environmental factors, and factors related to the individual, such as their ability to bear weight, their upper extremity strength, their postural stability, and any number of other factors that can impact this. So on the left-hand side of the slide, we see sit-stand aids, both manual, and then we also have power for those that can bear weight but may not have the strength or stability to stand on their own. In the top there, we have slide sheets and slide boards to slide from one surface to another rather than lift and lower from one surface to another. These also can be used to assist with getting in and out of vehicles, in and out of cars, front seats and back seats as well. We have transfer discs there on the left to allow the person to shift from standing in front of one kind of started seating position or seating surface to standing in front of the secondary seating surface by twisting on the disc, not moving their feet. And then in the middle there, we have a floor-based sling lift for more dependent patients or those without upper body or head or neck or postural control. I think that and I can't remember if this was mentioned in my in the intro or not, but my background is actually as an occupational therapist, and I think that inclusive design in homes is a really interesting area of work. There are so many things that we can do to ease the ability of people to live and work throughout the continuum of their life and their abilities in spaces when we use thoughtful design. So as I said, my father-in-law, for example, was dependent on his wheelchair after several strokes, and but he still wanted to be able to play poker in his upstairs game room with his friends. So they had a chairlift installed and kept a second wheelchair at the top of the stairs. So that allowed him to continue what ultimately is one of his, in retirement, activities of daily living. So that is kind of one engineering control. My parents, although both mobile, had bought a home that already had a chairlift on the steps from the first to second floor, and they opted to leave it installed just in case they ever needed it from a mobility standpoint. But they also, because they use it now to carry, or should I say, I guess, lift their laundry and other belongings up and down the stairs. So this reduces the weights that they have to be able to carry, but it also reduces the risks of falling on the steps due to being unable to see around the items they're carrying and being able to fully use their handrails. Bathroom use could account for maybe the most frequent reason to be raised or lowered from a seated position. And it's a good idea to determine the capabilities of the caree that needs assistance before trying to move forward with some of those transfers. Due to the frequency of use, the wet and slippery surfaces, and generally small bathrooms spaces can be a high risk of injury within the home. So again, due to space constraints, but also sometimes it's uncomfortable from a privacy perspective to assist a loved one with the use of the commode or the shower. So we need to make sure we do what we can to maintain some level of independence. And as I said, as an occupational therapist, I always remind people of just how the basic things that many of us take for granted, like the ability to stand at the sink and bend over to wash our face or brush our teeth, are so important to our ability to feel that we are accomplishing our activities of daily living. So in this case, you can see a variety of grab bars and shower benches and shower chairs, grab rails and supports at the sink and above the commode. So there are kind of a wide variety of things to try to assist with maintaining that independence. Stairs are a common area for falls. There are the basic trips and falls that happen to people in the best of health and youth. But as we age and our vision changes and our balance changes and the ability to step up and down physically changes, the hazards increase. And here we see a stair lift. Again, a use of a strong and easy to grip handrail to provide adequate clearance from the hand to the wall, to make sure someone has something concrete to grab onto. And then steps to aid with getting in and out of a larger vehicle. Many vehicles are so large now. And then while not in a photo here, we also can look and recommend ramps for both walking and rolling onto a raised surface. So even into the back of, for example, a van or a vehicle, if someone's unable to lift and lower themselves in, you can have kind of a ramp that can attach and deattach to allow someone to walk up that surface. And then here are some examples of ways to help with getting in and out of seated surfaces. You can raise the seated surface so that it's not as low to the ground by adding cushions or cushion inserts. There are seat cushion risers that go underneath a cushion as well, and will lift and lower the entire cushion kind of via remote control. Some recliners are designed to tilt up and forward to make it easier to come out of the chair. And even if the chair itself is not designed for that necessarily, there are devices that a chair can be mounted on or recliner can be mounted on that will lift and tilt upward to help bring someone to a standing position. And then people can use walkers for support. There's walkers that have kind of the little seat on them so that it's a mobility aid, but also the ability to kind of rest on it as well. And then just in general, handrails there kind of on the left, like you see, to be able to use upper body strength to help raise yourself up from a seated surface, or sitting on the edge where there's an armrest to be able to use your upper extremity support. And then seats that are kind of higher from the ground to begin with will make it a little bit easier for people to get in and out. So finally, at some point, the elderly or functionally impaired may also have the option of assistance of exoskeletons to assist them with daily living activities. For example, powered body suits that would help assist with walking, standing, and climbing stairs. There's some work being done to look at robotic exoskeletons and fall prevention in the elderly as well. There are gloves that increase grip strength that seem to be primarily industrial in function currently. But again, the occupational therapist in me sees it as something that, with modification could improve independence and function in those with a disability, injury, or weakness of the hand and upper extremity. So generally speaking, the future is bright. As we round out this presentation, thank you very much for your time today. We're happy to take some questions, and please feel free to reach out to us anytime if there's anything that we can do to support your general ergonomic related efforts in the future.
Thank you, John and Kelsey. This has been a really insightful presentation, and I think hits home for a lot of us. I have a few questions from our attendees. First question that came in was from Daniel Shaneholtz. He's asking, how do sensory impairments such as vision and hearing in the elderly impact the caregiver time? So I know you had mentioned that if the patient is impaired, the greater the likelihood that the caregivers will be called to assist with handling activities. I think that's what Daniel is talking about. I'm wondering too, in looking at the technology and different equipment that we could use with patients, have you encountered anything with that would assist with people who are impaired, people who have trouble with vision or hearing?
Officially, no, but anecdotally, my godmother is in her 90s and deaf as anything, and she refuses to use a hearing aid. And your ability just to interact with people or social feel as isolated all of a sudden are minimized. And I know in the literature, it states that hearing loss can lead to the onset of dementia, let's say earlier than if you did not have that hearing loss. So I don't know if that officially answers the question, but it is good to be able to hear from a social aspect, that you don't feel as isolated.
Yeah, I would also add one of my early OT experiences. I think I was actually on one of my rotations in school. We had a patient who had had a stroke and was very angry. And, you see that with cognitive changes and things. You see it's common in dementia to have kind of aggressive, angry emotions. But we thought he was just yelling at us all the time. But it turned out that his hearing had been impacted. He had hearing, he had not had, I guess, measurable or notable hearing loss previously, but we've figured out that, that was really one of the reasons we were having trouble communicating. And so I think as a caregiver, it's important to consider it may just, someone's anger or aggression may be really related to frustration, right? That they are having trouble hearing where they did not have that trouble before. Certainly these sensory impairments are going to add to caregiver time. It's another, if people aren't hearing, they're less able to follow directions. If their vision's impaired, they're less able to see where they're going. They're less able to be independent, even in their known environment, right? Even in their home environment. So all of that would, I would think, certainly increase overall time spent caregiving.
Thank you for those insights and those anecdotes. Those are really interesting stories. And yeah, thinking about that line between it's not just safety, but it's also social well-being, and thinking about how these impairments impact that. Piggybacking off of the anecdote that you were talking about, Kelsey, I have another question here. This person is an anonymous attendee and is asking, what research is being done on combative persons being cared for? Who's doing the research? I've worked with adults with disabilities for years, and the dynamic forces involved in physical restraints is problematic and should be researched. I would love to join the research and or conduct the research if you know of anyone doing it.
This is John here. That's a little outside our realm, but what you say is excellent points. And yeah, anything you can do to put someone at ease, especially if they're a little confused. But I do not know of anything. Kelsey might. I'll let her jump in, but I'm sorry I can't offer anything other than nice idea and good luck moving forward.
Yeah, I do know that, there is a lot. If you look at like nursing and especially in like, hospital or clinical settings, care, there's a lot of work being done on there's a lot of injuries from aggressive patients. And I know that there is work being done. As John said, it's a little outside of our direct kind of ergonomics. We're very applied ergonomics in this room, but there certainly is work being done, and I think it's an important area of study, just not only for the safety of the provider or the caregiver, but really for the overall well-being of the patient as well. How do we figure out what is creating the aggression? Is it medicine? Is it brain injury? Is it any variety of the reasons in between those two things? And how do we improve on that? So, I mean, I think it's an awesome idea, and please reach out if you find a good answer.
Thank you. Great. Yeah, I also think it's a really interesting area for research. We have a question from Bernard Fontaine. He's asking, can you discuss how healthcare companies match the type of caregiver with patients to avoid ergonomic stress? Is that something that you've encountered, and sort of how companies will think about ergonomics for home healthcare?
Yeah, so in this presentation, we kind of tried to focus more on kind of the informal caregiver, right? You're caring for your parent or a family member or a friend or whatever, a loved one. In the more, home health certainly is a high risk environment, as some of the statistics earlier in the presentation, spoke about. We try to suggest that engineering controls are always really, right, the best way forward. In home environments, as discussed, that can be a little bit more challenging. There are transportable floor-based lifts that are designed for a home environment. So they're meant to fold up, go in a trunk, and be able to be reasonably easily lifted out of a trunk and set up in a house. So I would advocate for whatever controls are available to be used. I think having multiple people, and this is an ideal world, insurance and money and all those things certainly play into this, but from a purely ergonomic musculoskeletal standpoint, having additional personnel available to help, I think would be another way of looking at it. Anytime we send someone by themselves into a care environment, and the thing with a patient is you don't know what patient you're getting that day. I mean, you may have been to see that person before, but you don't know if that morning they woke up with having a medication conflict, or their physical therapist was in and now they're extra tired, or any number of reasons that they could be more dependent today than they were the last time you saw them. It's definitely an area that needs to be probably looked at more closely and controls put in place.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think like the work that you've done is a really interesting start, and there's a lot of nuance in these situations. The last question I was wondering was, we're talking about situations with caregivers where it's pretty informal. There's not much regulation with how these caregivers are taking care of their patients. And I saw that your first recommendation was training and outreach. And I was wondering if there's any specific community organizations or resources that you have encountered that are doing this type of education.
So I have not looked at any particular services being offered. I'm sure each city would have the resources, so I would start there. In fact, when I was looking at this, once you start putting in caregiver resources, a lot of city services kind of populate first. How good or bad they are is another story, but that was I could see that would be a starting point, but I have not gone down a deep dive to figure out how much resources or what's available out there. Kelsey, do you have anything from your experience?
I can't recommend anything necessarily, any particular thing off, but as John said, I think a lot of community support is usually, you know, from the different healthcare systems or from the home healthcare providers, or even, you know, your local churches and community centers tend to have help. I know, like I was saying, with my mother-in-law and father-in-law, their local community in Eastern North Carolina built multiple ramps throughout their house and into the garage for them. They just showed up and brought the wood to do it and built it, and actually, and also removed it for them to be able to move out of that house. So, I think especially with the overall aging population, I think there's a lot of kind of those smaller informal opportunities to look for assistance.
Great, thank you. That makes a lot of sense that you would start in these local community organizations for resources. We are about at time. I just wanted to thank you, Kelsey and John, for presenting today, and thanks to everyone who joined us today for today's webinar. Be sure to check out our website for more information and to register for upcoming events at cueh@berkeley.edu/aboutce. Thank you again for your questions and participating. We hope to see you soon.
All right. Thanks again, everyone. Appreciate you taking the time.